And here we are, Monday night once again. Pine Island Research coming at you live, northern Minnesota. Quite a weekend. Went too fast, of course, as usual. But really, the week goes by fast. It seems like, and I've gotten to up here where we're at. I'm about done with the snow, to be honest with you. Our forecast this week is that we've got a 50% chance of getting 8 inches or more this week between tomorrow night and Wednesday and Thursday. So I'm ready for spring. I'm ready to put the dock out, fire up the pontoon, put some new line on the fishing rods, and have some fun in the sun and get rid of all the snow. But we got a little ways to go yet before we get there. So this morning we had coffee time on the Untold Radio Network. Our guests, Jay and Aspasia, were on, hosts of Down South Anomalies. Interesting conversation. Talked a lot about Jay's background as a musician. He was actually quite an influential presence in Australia in the late 70s, early 80s in the punk rock scene. And it was a fun conversation, but I'm excited about tonight's show. This is something that I'd been talking to Tim for a while about getting him on the show. And we finally got the stars to align where my schedule and his schedule had worked out. And that's not always easy, but I'm not going to waste any time. I'll bring them in. We've got Tim and Dana Halloran. How are you guys?
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Jeff. We're doing great. So excited to be here on your show.
Yeah, honored. Thanks for having us, Jeff. And the audience, we love you guys too. So we appreciate all the support. So,
well, I appreciate you guys coming on and taking the time. I know, once you drop a book like you dropped, you got people standing in line waiting to interview you. Earlier this evening, you were doing an interview, but you guys took some time out. I appreciate that. Just so everybody knows, we only get to be graced with Dana's presence for the first 15 minutes or so. Which I don't blame her for that. She's got a lot going on in a day.
I don't have that much more to me than 15 minutes. Tim's the one who wrote the book. Tim and I do the podcast. So I think that's, worthy of 15 minutes. And then Tim can have the rest for talking about how much time and how much effort and how awesome his book is.
Well, I think she's understating that, but
I do.
She's got a lot to talk about. So.
Yeah, let's not underestimate what you bring to this podcast. The Bigfoot influencers. You're the glue that holds that thing together. We all are aware of that.
The glue or the goof?
Well, I will tell you this. What I really appreciate about your guys' show is that it isn't just coming from the perspective of Tim. Dana, you bring so much interesting stuff to these conversations. And maybe I'm wrong, Tim. Maybe you feel this way, but there's times when you would get involved in a conversation with somebody, or you're asking questions or answering them, and Dana will ask a question, and it's like this revelation. That is such a great question, because the way my mind was going, I wasn't going to ask that, right?
100%.
Yeah. I mean, I try to ask questions that I feel like viewers would want to know. Tim is so much more wrapped up in the world of Bigfoot and who's who and what's going on, and I try to represent the normal people. Maybe even people who are just come into the world of Bigfoot.
Sure.
And I'm getting better. I was told early on, Jeff, to loosen up, so I'm getting better.
Well, I think you both do an excellent job when you have.
We have fun.
We have a lot of fun with it, for sure.
Yeah.
And Jeff, what you do is amazing.
And I also think that you have I think there's a great opportunity for you guys, not only because very rarely are you having on a guest that you don't know. I mean, these are people that you featured in the book, and people that you've had in-depth conversations. You've listened to them for. So having a conversation with somebody like that's a little bit easier than trying to have one with somebody that you're just meeting for the first time.
Yeah, and a lot of these folks were meeting at, a lot of the conferences that we go to, and so we get to know them not just, what they're doing in the world of Bigfoot, but also on a personal level. And so we have a lot of fun with them.
Yeah, like a lot of the folks, that are in the book that everyone knows their names. We met them and just chatted them up at seeing them at a conference and just became friends with them. So it's a lot of fun. It's really a lot of fun, and not the book helped. And again, I got hats off to Doug Hajicek, because Doug, if it wasn't for Doug, obviously the podcast. I mean, you already had an existing podcast, Jeff, but the book wouldn't have happened without Doug, and Doug opened a lot of doors. I knew some people, but he opened a lot of doors in it. And because I did the book and I already interviewed at least, the first group of folks on the podcast, it was easy to get a hold of them, and they knew what we were all about. So they weren't hesitant to jump on the podcast. So it made it a lot easier for us.
Yeah. I think the other interesting thing about the book is that you're not writing 1,000 feet away. It would have been any could have done a book and said, well, let me tell you about Grover Krantz. Let me tell you about Ron Moorhead. And they would write all the things they know, all the things they research and look up. But you're talking about writing a book based on you sitting down and listening to them, you having conversations with them, it wasn't just an interview. It was a two-way conversation where you derive so much in understanding this thing and know this. I think writing about them is so much easier than searching something,
Yeah, definitely. It was
who was your favorite? I don't want to ask you. No, there's a little bit of delay here, so I apologize for everybody for that.
What's our favorite person on the podcast?
So before Dana has to go.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to ask you a question about the book later. I want to ask what everybody's wondering. How did Tim meet Dana? How did they get to be a couple? How does he maintain playing maybe slightly out of his league? And no, I'm joking when I say that. But no, I'm totally joking, Tim. But
she's a keeper.
I mean, there that people. Oh boy.
Yeah, we didn't hear anything you just said there, Jeff. Sorry, honey.
So you want to know how
you guys hear me?
Yep, you're back now.
Yeah.
So
tell us all.
We met through a nonprofit organization that we both worked with, and it was kind of love at first sight.
Mm-hmm.
I remember our first date very well. Our first date was a lunch date, and Tim picked me up from my workplace, and he, it was just like a 2-minute drive to the restaurant, and we get to the restaurant, and he parks the car, and we get out of the vehicle, and we're walking into the restaurant, and was it because you were just so in love
mesmerized with me? I was, yeah.
But he left the car running.
I literally walked out of the car and left the keys in.
I was like, are you going to turn off your car? So that was like a really fun thing about our first date. But we are you're my true love.
Yeah, we met late in life, but
we did.
If we met earlier, I probably would be in jail trying to fight off everybody.
Oh, you stop. We would have. It would have been perfect then too. So we're very lucky because not only is he my true love, but he's also my best friend. We have a lot of great times together. We really get each other, and we're both really similar. I think that's something that where the podcast thing was really successful with us is because we like to entertain, and we also like to go out and, have friends who have dinner parties. And, we're that couple at the dinner party that we're just very curious about people. And so we're kind of like the people who are engaging a lot with people and asking them questions and getting to know them. So I think for us, we're both very interested in the topic of Bigfoot. And so, though we're not researchers, we love the idea of introducing the world to all of the amazing researchers. And we just feel like when we're having our podcast, that we're at a dinner party and we're just asking people questions and getting to know them and introducing them to the world.
That's awesome. I almost feel like if Tim was, or if you, Dana, were to interview 1,000 different people to co-host a podcast with you, you couldn't find somebody who clicks better than you two do with each other. And I think that is something that everybody who watches your show feels, and anybody who's probably ever been a guest on your show feels too. But
yeah, I think in the beginning I made you a little nervous.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Jeff.
Because I'm like more of like I just come up with things, and he was like very like Tim
I was worried about some of the couple of every once in a while I was like, oh my gosh, what is she gonna ask?
He would like go and like hit me under the table. I'd be like, what did I do? And now he stopped, and I told
it was
him,
nerves. Yeah.
Like, baby, we need to be like real with people. Like, this is me, So I'm going to ask some questions that might seem like a little like, whatever, but that like, and now you've loosened up a lot too.
So
we have a lot of fun with it.
We
Jeff.
do. We enjoy
really
it. We do have fun. We
it's
look forward to it.
It's a fun thing for us. We love, like I said before, we just love interviewing people in the world of Bigfoot, because there are so many people who don't know who everybody is and what they're doing.
Sure.
And so that it all comes from Tim's whole Bigfoot influencers book of just introducing the world to these people.
Or we had Dr. Kenny Brown on an episode, and he's the first podcast he's ever done. He's really, I guess, the first time he's gone to conferences, and he's spoken at, I think he spoke at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference, and he's got a Bigfoot family, but his mom, dad, brothers, they're all into it. They all go out in the woods together, but he never really came out in public. He just became a doctor or a licensed physician, and he's going to be a name that I think we're going to hear for a long time. So it's fun. It's really fun to doing things like that. So
it is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and there is a huge advantage to being, sitting next to each other on camera rather than Tim in the other room on a different computer, because you're always within elbows reach of each other.
So he can nudge me under the table when he feels like I'm acting up.
I got the bruises to prove that's a fact.
I think Doug was saying that maybe you guys should be like on separate. I'm like, no, because I love my baby. I get to touch his ear and you
it's
love
fun.
that.
I love
Unless
it.
You're
I love it. Yeah.
Well, the few times that we have had kind of our network meetings where we've had all the hosts on a stream or on a Zoom, there have been times where you guys started on separate ones, and it doesn't take 5-10 minutes and Tim's standing next to you on your
I know,
camera.
then he's like a stalker. He's like,
you guys can't stand being away from each other anyway, so that would never work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just because with both of our jobs probably working from home, we're used to like being
on different
so but I think definitely, Jeff, you're right. The last one we did, Tim came over to my computer. But we're used to it at this point, so it's totally cool. But hey, it's been 15 minutes.
There you go.
You guys have had enough of me. I know you're all crying and you're like, please, Dana, don't go. But I'm going to go. That way you guys can talk about Tim and his book and how awesome he is.
Yeah, we can still talk about the podcast, obviously.
Yeah. So. And thank you, Jeff, so much for having me on.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Dana.
Absolutely. And I look forward to seeing you at the next staff meeting.
Yeah.
Have a great night, guys.
We'll see you.
I'm going to slide over here to get in front of the mic.
Sure. So, we
All the
both.
listenership, everyone just left. Now the damn
Yeah, I was
time.
say I went from 34 to 32 viewers just in like the half a second of her walking away. So at least 2 people said I'm out. But so you wrote the book. Okay, I'm not going to back up start again. I'm going to start in the middle for a moment. You had the book come out, and as we launched the network, I remember Doug telling me when we were talking about different shows that were going to be a part of the network, that Tim Halloran, the author of the Bigfoot Influencers, was going to do a podcast with his wife. When was that I mean, had you been doing podcasts before, or was this kind of a new step for you?
Good question, and brand new to it. I mean, we've both of us have had careers where we've had to speak in front of people and things like that. Not that I'm perfect, but yeah, we were brand new. I had been thinking about it with the book. Obviously, Doug's become a friend like he has with you, and I just say, you know what, I should probably do a podcast. I've got all these amazing people in the book. I can introduce them to the world. Not introduce them because everyone knows who they all are, but just have interviews with them and just kind of do an extension of the book. And I chatted with Doug about it. He goes, well, you know what? And this is before I knew he was going to open up the network. And he goes, hey, I'm thinking about expanding the network. And that's how it happened. So we're like, hey, that's a no brainer. I mean, because we knew nothing. Not like you, because you're a professional at podcasting.
No, I'm not.
Well,
I mean, I had a channel for about probably about 8 months. That I was at Pine Island Research. I still have the channel because I'll do just kind of casual afternoon stuff on it, But I had been thinking about doing a network, and just the idea that Doug's show on Wednesday night certainly had a big following, and especially on the podcast platforms, as we've all became aware of now with the network, that our podcast listenership is over 10 times what we achieve here in viewers and views on YouTube. I mean, it's just crazy how many people listen to these shows. But I thought, you've got one show on one night of the week, which means when I look at my subscriptions and I see Untold Radio, that little light next to it is only one night a week for 2 hours, right? What if that light was on 7 nights a week? What if we had 7 different guests doing 7 different shows there? And the idea was that you could cancel your DirecTV if you're, no matter what you're really into, you could find something that fits you to watch on Untold Radio Network, and there'd always be something on every night. Now, I get, and you've probably discovered that too, when we're talking about Bigfoot, I mean, your show really is covering the well-known names in this community. My show's covering some of them, and also maybe people have never heard of that have had encounters or had experiences that I find worth sharing, that people should hear about. I kind of approach the subject from a nuts and bolts standpoint, flesh and blood standpoint, not saying there's not more to it, but that's where I'd start when I'm looking at it from a research perspective. And when other people who were following my show came here, they start seeing Jason McLean and Dr. Dean Bertram talking about the Loch Ness Monster on Mysterious Libraries. And they're like, woo, that's not my area. I get that. I also see people that are here for those shows who are looking at what we're doing with Sasquatch saying, it's not really my cup of tea. I totally understand that individually, not every show is for everybody, but it is so neat to see all these different areas of cryptids, paranormal, ufology, all of that being covered on one channel, because I do believe that we do share a lot of our chat members amongst all these different shows. Have you noticed that too?
Oh yeah, we do, and thanks you. I mean, I think yourself and Doug, you guys pull them in, and I see the same folks um, on ours, and I know why they're jumping in because they listen to your show, and then we talk about each other's show, and they listen to Doug's show, and then we're on the network, so it's fun. We're appreciative. I think overall, I think we're always going to have there's always going to be those individuals out there who don't like what we do and are vocal about it. But I think we have a really cool Untold family or community here. I mean, all you guys listening are just it's just fun, and I appreciate we really do appreciate it because we take it seriously. We want to, and we don't, not that we fail, don't succeed all the time, but we want to put out good content. We want to help educate, and we want the viewers and the listeners to get something out of it and hear something they hadn't heard before, because that's always tough too, Jeff. You know that. Sure. Folks listen, like when I first listened to you, I think it was when you were on Doug's podcast maybe a couple of years ago, and he was interviewing you, and I said, wow, that's the first time I ever heard it, heard your story. And but sometimes what I'm trying to do, and Dana and I with the network, and you've probably seen it because you're internal, but for the audience, we know that the guests, we'll say, here's a great example, Cliff Barrickman. I messaged Cliff, and I reached out to Cliff, and I said, hey, Cliff, do you want to jump on the podcast in a couple weeks? And he goes, well, I'm doing Doug's show next week, and then I've got Dr. Russ scheduled a couple weeks after that. He said that might be too much Cliff for everybody. So, and he's right. And yeah. So I said, yeah, let's push it back because we want to keep it fresh, and we want to keep this. There's so many individuals like yourself out there that have done research there's enough people we can talk to and interview. For me, it's the path of least resistance, and is because we had no experience talking to witnesses or I knew the people from the book, so that's where I gravitated to at first. So we're starting to branch out a little bit and explore some different things, but that's our sweet spot. And as I start the second book, I've got at least a year's worth of people to interview, I think.
It's a you can talk to one person, and in that conversation you'll come up with 3 more that you need to talk to. It seems like that's kind of the way it is with guests for me. I'll have a guest on, and they'll talk about somebody that they've had an experience with or worked with, and I'm thinking, well, now I want to get them on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that, well, for instance, I've got a show coming up next Monday where a person that you wrote about in the book, he's been a guest several times on my show before I was with the network, and once since I've came to the network. And that's just because he's a friend of mine, is Todd Neese. And Todd I wanted to have Ron Moreland on, but I didn't want to do the same canned interview that Ron Moreland probably gets over and over and over. And, knowing that Doug has the contacts he has, I mean, I honestly believe that any of us here on the network, especially shows like mine and yours that are approaching exclusively the Sasquatch subject, I mean, if I went to Doug and said, I want to get Matt Moneymaker on, or I want to get Renee on, or somebody like that, this isn't hard to do.
Right.
The thing is I've got to look at that and say, is this a guest that is, if you looked at the last 100 interviews that guest gave, they look pretty similar. I mean, it's a lot of the same questions over and over, kind of the same, I don't want to say canned responses, but they get used to how they answer these questions that they're constantly asked. I want my interviews to be a little bit different. And most of the time they develop into a conversation. It's almost like we're just sitting around the bar at the pub having a beer talking about things rather than what you would imagine an interview to be. And so the idea of having Ron Moreland on, I thought I want to have him on with Todd because those two are close friends. They've spent so much time in the field together. They've had so many experiences together that I'd rather just light the campfire, kick back in the lawn chair, and let them two just tell their stories. We're so I really think there's a good chance we're going to hear them talk about something people haven't heard them talk about before, or
I
share
agree.
before.
100%.
I don't think there's any bullet point list of questions I could ask Ron that would be different than many of the interviews he's given. So, yeah, but you're right. I've seen where when we have, 3 or 4 Bigfoot shows on this network where we do have to be paying a little bit of attention in both in the rear view and out the front windshield of who's having who on or who's recently had this guest on before we just go book a guest to come on any of our shows.
Right.
So,
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to do better at that. Like we'll have Todd on in the future, in the near future, actually. Now that you got me thinking, maybe I'll push him back a little bit. But yeah, it's interesting because Todd Neese is so fascinating. But I've got some things I think he and I kicked around ideas and want to talk about some things that he normally doesn't talk about, or all together. I mean, not obviously we're going to talk about some of the similar things, but just to agree with what you're doing, it's let's bring something different, because it's these people, yourself included, just have so much more to the canned questions. There's so much more to you guys than what everyone already knows. So I think it's just let's dig into that. That's what we try to do on the podcast, at least. So
yeah, I think that's one of the real valuable things that I find about your and Dana's show is that I've read the book, but when I see those guys come on and do these people that you've wrote about coming on and do interviews, it's not just a carbon copy of what you would have read in the book. It is completely different. These conversations are different. So I think that's what people really find interesting about it.
Yeah,
Todd's in the chat. He says,
Todd
I can share many untold stories. He's right. He is right. I will confess, I can say this much with Doug, Todd, several people I've talked to. I've heard a lot of stories and been involved with conversations with them where I've been sworn to secrecy. I was told don't talk about that because there will be a time in which they will probably talk about it, but it's just, it's not now, and I get that, I understand that. There's so many things that kind of dictate the pace of where we go from here,
Right. I think there's so many, like you said, I've had conversations, off the record conversations that there's a lot more people are seeing and have exposure to than in the public eye.
Yeah.
There's just more going on out there. And so.
And, I think one of the things that's helpful is, when you listen to Thomas Steinberg talk about the old days, and where research was decades ago, there were many, there weren't 50 people to put in a book. There just wasn't. Right. And, those guys and those people who were involved back then, a lot of them didn't really get along with each other. And he talks openly about that. He says, he had to take the perspective of saying, hey, he'd have somebody say, well, what did they say about this? And he'd say, I'm not going to tell you what they said about this. I'm not going to tell them what you say about this. He really played that neutral approach and perspective working with other people. But he really brings to light how much difference there was amongst a lot of the guys that were involved in this 30 years ago and 40 years ago. I think that there's a lot of hope in looking at where we go from here, simply because of not only how fast technology is evolving and probably going to be very helpful in that process, but the relationships that are being built,
I know you talk about that a lot, Jeff, and it's trying to bring the collective group of researchers together. Because I agree with you. I mean, I'm not a researcher, obviously, but I just been the individuals I've chatted with. I think it's critical. I mean, why would you not want to share that, what we'll call them, best practices or what you've learned with someone else, because it's just going to help. I mean, I know what it's about. It's about egos and things like that. And I just think it's how we're going to get to the next level, and combined sharing of information is a good thing. So
Yeah, I had a conversation the other day with a friend of mine, Leon Thompson, who is pretty well known for
yeah,
his take on human behavior, PTSD situations, how people react differently to different things. And one of the things, and he's been doing this for an awful long time. And he says, he reads body language. He looks at a lot of different things when it's almost like I'm almost kind of conscious of that. You have a conversation with him and he's like studying you, right?
I know. Yeah.
But he said one thing to me that really rang very, I thought was pretty resonant to the conversation and relevant. And that's that when we see somebody else regurgitating something we've said or a point that I make, and the next 2 nights later, I see somebody saying the same thing. It's so easy for some people to look at that and be offended by it. I said that first. You're taking my idea. The truth is if we believe and subscribe to the idea of we share because we're trying to help, that should be the ultimate compliment, is seeing somebody referencing something, even if they don't mention your name as a reference. Somebody using something you put out there really should be something that we take as a compliment.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, even though I'm not as educated on the subject, just through the people I've talked to, as yourself and a lot of folks are, but I've uh, I've even seen the word, and some people hated the book title of influencer just because they don't understand, because it's all over social media and such. But I started hearing people on other podcasts and shows talk about, influencers. So, indirectly, coming from the title of the book. So I don't mind. That's great. I think it's a cool thing.
Well, everybody's got their own idea of how to interpret different viewpoints, different even words. I mean, you hear a lot of people taking offense to people who are referred to as an expert in something. And, look, I agree with that to an extent. There's no universities giving out doctorates in Bigfootology, right? We're all the
Right.
professors and we're all the students. We learn and we learn from each other. We teach each other. But I also kind of feel like there are experts in different fields of science that we have to involve in this progression if we're going to move the ball off the 5-yard line that Patterson Gimlin left it on 5 decades ago,
Right.
and that's an art in itself, finding those people who are using things in science right now. I wrote about that a little bit in my book that's coming out. You've read, you kind of pre-read the book for me, gave me your ideas on it. But I think that's just so important that we stop looking in the corner of the room that we're standing in, and we start looking out of it for the help to move this forward. But I hear that from a lot of people that you included in the book too. A lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, I think there's more community going on. I mean, a lot of people talk about the Bigfoot community and the animosity that, but I mean, there is that. I mean, and that's probably in any industry, any media, any type of, it doesn't matter where you are. Our workplace is the same way, but there's more collaboration going on. I mean, could there be more? Yes, but I think there's more going on than most realize. There's a lot of talking amongst researchers and friends and things that they're sharing data back and forth. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, a lot of the backroom chats that I've been involved with other people that I look at as being, people of integrity who are trying to do something in this community for the better. I'll be, after you're on a show or after you've had a guest on, and these conversations that happen in the background when the go live button is off on YouTube, I can't tell you how many times where I feel like, man, if that would have been out there on YouTube, this probably would have gone viral in this community.
Right.
I mean, there's just so many conversations that take place amongst other people that I just think this is an awesome representation of what should be taking place on camera all the time. It's just for whatever reason, we don't always get to see that. And that's why I am kind of looking forward to Todd and Ron being on together. I really feel like Ron has some very intricate viewpoints that he has put an awful lot of thought and experience into coming up with. And some of them may be different than the ones that I hold. But, when I hear him have a conversation with Todd in that way, I'm really hoping to portray some of those atmospheres we find in that after chat that people really don't get to see. It's more of a candid, educational approach to it. But
Right. And with Ron Moorhead, it's many may not believe what he believes. But the one thing about Ron, I will say, is he's accepted, though. So even the researchers and the individuals who don't believe in quantum physics and the quantum Bigfoot and vibrations, they still respect what he's done. So I think that says a lot about what he's done. So
well, and I really, I don't know how many times I've watched somebody on a different show being interviewed, just kind of checking out the podcast. And in the end, on the backside of that interview, I'll say, maybe we agreed on 70%, disagreed on 30%, but I still learned something from this person. And, to look at somebody like Ron and say, well, I disagree on this one way that he approaches something, therefore I'm not going to listen to him. I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice, because he has an awful lot of things that you may find you agree with him on, even if there's some things you don't. And I think I'm not sitting here meaning to use Ron as an example. I think you could apply that to just about anybody you put in your book,
Oh, definitely. And the things you've done with the different colors of the ball. I mean, there's things that you could take what you've done and share it with another researcher, and they may not agree with everything you're doing, and you may not agree with what they're doing, but that doesn't mean if we can move aside as human beings from the 10 to 20% we don't agree on, and let's focus on what we do agree on, and then maybe we can move forward somewhere.
Yeah. That, whether it's 1% or whether it's 50%, the stuff we don't agree on can be a dangerous weapon. It really can. It stops all communication. It stops a lot of times it stops just being respectful. And that's such a shame, But let's talk a little bit about the process of writing the book. When you were doing the interviews, I'm not going to put you on the spot, Tim, and ask you, who was your favorite person you interviewed? I don't want to do that.
It changes by the week, so you can ask.
But the way that you did the interview, it was really, the book was wrote through conversations and listening to them tell you about stuff, and then you write from that. And I believe there had to have been moments in which you were just sitting there just awestruck listening to some of these things. Are there certain moments that when you look back are like, man, I'll never forget listening to them tell me about that, or her?
Oh, there's quite a few. I think maybe one was having a one-on-one conversation with Dr. Meldrum, and when he explained the Walla Walla trackway that got him hooked. And everyone has different opinions on everything that came out of the Blue Mountains.
Sure.
But I had a one-on-one conversation with, and he gave me the background of the story. And he said he was traveling. Him and his brother decided they were going to take a trip. The wives were going out shopping or something for the weekend, and he said, "Hey, let's drive up to see Dr. Krantz." I don't know if can't remember if he even met I know he had met Dr. Krantz because he met him when he was younger. But I don't know if he had ever been up to Washington State, but they went up and they spent some time with Dr. Krantz. And then on the way back home, they had some weather conditions, and they decided to take a different route home. And they said, while we're going this way, why don't we stop by and see Paul Freeman? And it was total impromptu. And he said, I literally pulled up. My brother and I pulled up at his house at the same time he was pulling up. So he had no idea they were coming. They didn't call him ahead of time. And, and that's when they're sitting in his living room and going through casts, and Paul's pulling out all some casts and the evidence and such. And he said, well, actually, do you want to see a trackway? I just found one this morning. And long story short, they went out to the trackway, and from his background, he just said there was no way that it was a long trackway, and he was looking at the toe splay that was different in every track. He could tell it was the same print, but the toe splays were different, or the depth was different, or the way it hit. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm probably sounding stupid right now, but he said it was just in his, and that's what got hooked him. He said in his eyes and mine, they said there's no way this could have been hoaxed or faked. And but hearing it coming from his mouth, he and I just having conversation about it, that sticks out. And that was a pretty cool moment. Just something that really sticks in my head. And I mean, there's a couple other ones, but if you want to reflect on that, we can talk about that too, on Jeff's.
Yeah, I think when I imagine all the people that you wrote, I'm just going through in my head, actually kind of recalling all the different people that you included in the book. How many of those conversations must have just really been like just on the edge of your seat, listening to them talk about different things. But a lot of it is, everybody's different. Not everybody. Some people answer questions differently than others. They're very matter of factly. They're kind of cross the T's, dot the I's, and other people, you can tell that you feel that compassion, or you feel that emotion that when they're telling you about an experience or something that they do, you actually sense that in the way that they're sharing it with you. So I can see where, like I say, I never would put you on the spot and say, who was your favorite person to interview? But I can see where those interviews really varied, probably, in how it was doing them.
And we that happens on the podcast too. We'll have a guest, and we're like, wow, that was such an amazing podcast. Is that our best one? And then next week we have another one. It's just because all the guests are so fascinating. It's just like one after another, and it's pretty cool. There was Kathy Strain, when she told me the story, when she had the daytime sighting coming from her mouth. And there's 4 of them there when they were down in southeast Oklahoma with the North American Wood Ape Conservancy in Area X. And she tells me the story, and then she came on the podcast and told the story as well. And it's one of 2 things. I mean, well, I guess it's one of 3 things. Either she's not telling the truth, which that means her and 3 other ones aren't telling the truth. And obviously Kathy Strain is one of the most respected people out here, or she misidentified, but this was a daytime sighting and 4 of them saw the same thing, or she really saw what she saw. So it's just, those things were just fascinating. Daryl Collier, that stuck out. I remember interviewing Daryl, and same thing when he tells, he's telling me, and Daryl's kind of no nonsense. Daryl Collier, who's off, I'm sure audience Daryl with the conspiracy as well, and when he's sharing his first sighting, and he's a no nonsense guy. You get to, there's nothing in it for him to BS anybody, and are you going to say you're not telling the truth? And I just remember hearing him tell the story. I'm like, wow, it's just fascinating just to hear their accounts of what they saw and experienced. So
yeah. For those that aren't familiar, I mean, was the Bigfoot Influences the first book that you had wrote?
Good question. And yes, I never even thought I was going to write a book. Never wrote a book before. And I wrote the book, although because it's an interview style, the words in the chapters are the answers to the questions that I asked. So it's really not my words per se for a good chunk. I mean, I wrote introductions to the chapter, and I have some other things I wrote throughout the book. But it's really the influencers' words. I mean, we edited, because but every interview was an audio or video / audio interview. So then I had to take those interviews because I thought that was fun. I didn't want to just send them a bunch of questions and have them answer them. That's
sure.
And there was a couple I did because there's a couple questions with that I would send. So if you want, we can kind of go back to the process of that. I came up with a group of questions, which was, again, this book has been a collective effort. I thought of some questions. Actually, Dana helped me with some questions. Our son Gabriel helped me with some questions, and I had a bunch of questions, and I sent the questions over to Matt Pruitt. For the audience who doesn't know Matt Pruitt's been involved in the subject for a while as well, and get his opinion. And then I'd send it to Doug, and Doug says, typical Doug, I love him so much. He goes, too many personal questions. Because I want to get the people to know the people as people too. So
Sure.
He said, scale back on the personal questions, which he was right. And then I even scaled back even more after my original ones. So I came up, so I had a list of questions. So some of them, though, I thought that maybe they do want to put some more thought to it. So I did send those, a group of them out ahead of time. So I had some canned questions, not some canned questions, but someone I got a written response back. Not with everyone, but there's a couple of individuals I interviewed that I just did all audio. But then I got on then we had our interview. It was, typically an hour and a half to 2 hours long. And then I interviewed them. And then from there is, that's where all the work started. I mean, that's the fun part. That's the fascinating part, getting to sit and chat with these folks that you see on TV, they're out in the public, that have written books, and then the not so fun part is taking all this audio and turning it into a paragraph or into a chapter and then transcribing it. So that was a little bit of process, but I've learned a lot since then. On how to make that an easier and faster process. But, originally, so say I interviewed you, Jeff, I was going back literally and listening to the audio and manually transcribing it, like the old days, because I looked into hiring somebody, you can hire these services to transcribe, and,
Sure.
and 99% of the books out there, aren't interview style. So no one else would have to go through this. And I said, there's no way I can afford to pay someone whatever it was per hour or per page or per word count. So I was doing it all by my ear and transcribing it that way. And then about halfway through the interviews, I found a web-based, I guess it's art AI, and you can send it in. Your audio in, and then it spits back the transcription, like within 45 minutes or an hour or so. It's not perfect, but it definitely saved me a ton of time. And then I'd go back through and have to clean it up after that. So,
Sure.
But
well, you had mentioned, first of all, if Doug is listening, I want you to know, I think me and Tim share the same view of Doug gives me constructive criticism all the time, and I always take it in a positive way because he has a lot of experience doing a podcast. He has a lot of experience doing interviews. He's got a lot of experience producing major productions. So I mean, I just there's so much to learn from him that if he's going to take the time to give me some advice, I'm not going to turn that opportunity down. But you know, your experience writing your book is similar to mine. I've never wrote a book before. And so I found the publishing process quite interesting. One, just learning of the steps as you go through it, but two, kind of how easy it is. I mean, for you, the writing and the transcribing and whatnot was obviously a difficult task. Getting everything that they said, not wanting to misrepresent anything that they may have said. I mean, that's a huge deal too. But once it's down, once you've got it wrote down, whether it's in Word or whatever you're using, the process of putting it into Hangar One, I sent it to Alex and Blaine, them over at Hangar One, and it going into the editing process. And then there's an approval process. And then there's cover design and all this layout. It was pretty easy. I mean, it didn't take a lot of work at all. I'd get sent proofs. I'd get sent stuff saying, read through this. And if that's how you want that presented, sign off on it. But it was really quite amazing that aside from the actual task of writing the book, how easy it is to publish a book. And I hope that there's people in chat who maybe have thought about that or considered the idea of doing that they understand both from mine and your experiences. That's not really an overwhelming process, is it?
Oh no, I agree. I think I'd encourage anyone again. You and I've never written a book before, so I had no clue on what I was walking into. And I reached out to Doug originally because I knew they had launched the publishing arm of the company, and obviously I admire Doug. I did then, I still do. And if there's any publishing company I was going to go to, why, it was a no-brainer. I said, so because he's in the world, Doug's so well respected, he's connected, and it's the same genre that I was interested in. So the process, again, I'm going to encourage anyone who wants to write a book, do it. I mean, it's fun. It was, and they make it pretty easy. I mean, I was surprised on how nothing's seamless. So it wasn't like, Jeff and I just threw something out and it came out perfect. But yeah, I mean, Alex and Blaine, Hajicek, and Doug, they just collectively, they walk you through everything. There's not, they do a lot of the, they put all the pieces together for you. You just have to do what you want to do. You write your book, and they'll help you with the creative work, the editing, and it wasn't that much. I mean, again, I'm thrilled to be part of that team.
Yeah, no, I am too. I really appreciated how they helped me with that, but also it was a pretty quick process too. I mean, over a couple of months from when I submitted the manuscript to when it's actually going to be released was less than 3 months. I mean, it's a pretty quick process. It doesn't take, now, just so people understand, nobody writes a book to get rich. Okay. The idea that I will tell you the amount of time that I put into writing the book and the amount of time that's being put into the editing and excuse me, the artwork, all that stuff. We all could have went and worked at Taco Bell Monday through Friday and made more money doing that than we could have probably writing a book. But just so that people understand, it is an opportunity to share your experiences, if they're experiences that you feel people would benefit from. I certainly didn't approach it from a point of vanity. I didn't look at it and say, "Oh boy, everybody better hear what I have to say." I had so many people coming to me saying, "Hey, can you tell me about your encounter really quick?" And it's like, well, I didn't just see something walk across the road 150 yards in front of me for 4 seconds. If I'm going to tell you about my encounter, I'd like to take you on the journey of what happened that day, right? And I've shared it on different channels, but it just occurred to me that if there was a book of it, if there was a book where you could sit down when it's convenient for you on your couch, when you're ready, and go on that journey, it might be something that you would enjoy listening to a lot more than asking me or about it in an interview somewhere, and that's why I did it. I still don't know if it'll ever make any money. That's not the reason why I did it. So
Yeah, there definitely isn't a reason to do it for me either. So
it's funny how people will pull that out as the reasoning. I mean, they'll say, "Oh, you left Pine. You had your own channel. You had it going good, and you go over and join Untold Radio. You sold out and did it for the money." That's what the people who don't like. The people who are in the exclusive Bigfoot corner of the room and don't want to open their minds up to anything else, they're going to say you did it for the money. I'm telling you right now, if that's the case, I don't know where that money went, but
yeah, me neither.
I like the analogy I used. I think we could all go to Taco Bell and make more money than we're making sitting here doing YouTube stuff. We do it because we're passionate about it. My encounter was where my journey started. I didn't have any threshold of what Bigfoot was or any preconceived notion of what this thing is. It led me to wanting to learn that. But there's a lot of people who listen to both of our podcasts for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are doing it for entertainment. Some of them are doing it because they've had an experience. And this feels like a place where they're communicating or listening to people that gets them or understands where they've been. Other people are trying to learn as much as they can about research and who are the people historically in this subject to pay attention to and who shouldn't I pay attention to. And so everybody's here for something different. And I think regardless of what that reason is, you're finding what you're looking for,
And like yourself, Jeff, and someone like Todd Neese, you didn't want to get into this, into the subject. It pulled you in. You had no choice. It was a life-changing event that you guys had, and you had no choice but to get involved in it because of what happened to you. So I think, I think it just, that touches a lot of people who've had experiences because you can connect with them and they can connect with you and they understand that and they relate to you. And it comes through when you guys, you tell your accounts and what happened and it's definitely, even if you help one or two people that just wanted to hear that someone else had the same experience, I think it's all worth it. So hats off to you guys for really opening up and sharing what you've done and what happened to you, with the public.
Yeah, if you ask different people who are working in field research to whatever degree, what's your reason for wanting to bring truth to this mystery for everybody? That I think you're going to hear different degrees of that. But really for me, because of when my experience was, and then I was in the military, I did a job in the military where I held the security clearance. I was worried I was going to lose it if anybody ever heard me talk about it. the first 18 years of my marriage. I was worried that this woman's going to think I'm crazy. I can't, this is the most important person in the world to me. I can't jeopardize that or risk that. I had a real estate firm working in real estate development with a couple of friends who invested heavily in these projects that I was working on. And, if one of them would have said, boy, I question your integrity, or I'm not sure I can believe what you're saying, financially, I would have been ruined, So, I mean, I held this inside for so long before I started talking to other hunting guides that I network with, other outdoors people, Doug himself. And that's when I realized that when people say, well, when did you become a believer, or are you a believer or a non-believer or a skeptic? I think people like Todd Neese, myself, Jay Fritz, Joe Schneider, guys I've had on this podcast, people I've had on this podcast that have shared their experiences, they don't get the luxury of choosing whether or not they believe or not. Bigfoot is as real to me as my pickup truck that's parked out in the driveway. There's no believing that it's there. It's knowing that it's there. But I think the biggest, for me, the one thing that drives me the most is if we could show the world that there is no doubt that, something that science will look at and say, absolutely, you were right. It may create an atmosphere where somebody doesn't go 30 years feeling like this is too taboo to talk about. There's too much to risk here, because that is a weight and a burden that people don't realize what that's like, to go that long after having an experience that was so impressionable on you. And for a lot of people, damaging to a certain degree, because they're not able to process it right. And feel like they're never in a position or amongst people they can talk about it. If we could create that atmosphere that this isn't wrong, everybody understands that this thing's out there, there's a lot of people who won't have to endure that anymore. And to me, that's the biggest reward of getting this ball pushed forward enough to prove that it's real.
Right. And what's interesting on the other spectrum with some of the researchers and the other individuals that I've spoken with in the book and on the podcast is there's also that group of individuals that have been involved in it for many, many years, and they haven't had that compelling encounter that you have and others have, and they want to check that off the box so they can move forward with their research, because there's still that question in their mind of, is this thing, and we'll talk, like Thomas Steenberg's a great example. I mean, he's found tracks, and he's told me, he said, yeah, but he thinks he saw one from a distance, but he hasn't had that, that close encounter compelling. So there's still that little etch of, I hate to say doubt, because I don't think it's doubt, but they want to check off the box that, wow, they experienced something that there's zero doubt that this creature is out there, and then they can move on and not focus on it, because a lot of the researchers are focused on, hey, maybe they're not focused on it, but they want to experience that, have that compelling experience first, because it's holding them back from all their other research they want to do. And once they have that, they can be more productive in what they're doing. I don't know if productive is the right word, but I don't know if that makes sense. But
I think it's just being motivated to do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, for those that are really, and I haven't spent a lifetime in research. I've only spent really one April through November where I was really pushing it hard, to where I was kayaking into this area. And, over the course of those months, I kayaked over 1,000 miles. There was days where it was raining on me and I was freezing cold, and I didn't want to be there and didn't want to do it. But because I'd seen it and I knew that that it's possible this could be out here where I'm going, and that drove me to not quit. I often think I have a great deal of respect for people who are involved in field research who have not had that visual confirmation, because I'll tell you what, I can name a dozen times where I would have quit and never came back.
Right.
I honestly would have. And I may, and I don't know this, but I may, had I found this community without having that experience, I may be the biggest skeptic out there, stomping on everybody's hopes and dreams. And I hate to say that too, but, when I see somebody say, hey, look, I haven't had that experience, but, thousands upon thousands of encounters, many of them from varying people that hold positions of integrity. We're talking law enforcement officers, forestry officials, things like that. And then you hear all these encounters being shared. And I'm not naive enough to think the 1,000 episodes of Sasquatch Chronicles that they're all real. Maybe some of them are lying. Maybe half of them are lying. But boy, I've heard an awful lot of accounts being shared where the genuine way that they're sharing it and the emotion that is in their voice, I connect with that and say, this is not a coincidence that many people are out there saying this happened to me. Right. And when I see people who haven't had an experience say, I believe them, I there's a lot of respect to be shown there for somebody to be able to arrive at that point and say, I believe on what I've seen from others and heard from others, even though I haven't had that personal experience, that this thing likely exists. Man, I have a tremendous amount of respect for those people, because I just see how easy it would be had I never had this encounter to start with at 18 years old. I don't know that I would endure some of the things that you do, and I'm sure Todd feels that same way, and Jay Fritz, who had his encounter when he was 18 years old,
and Joe,
how easy it would be to just say, but I've met so many people, in the last few years, through other channels, through chats, through doing my show, who, at the end of the book, when I wanted to thank people who have influenced me or played a positive impact on me, boy, I'll tell you what, I could have wrote 2 chapters just writing names down. I really could have.
Oh, I know. It's so. I hate, like, my book was such a. It was a collective effort. I mean, it was nice to see people come together. Everyone was so helpful. With wanting to be part of the book. I only had a few people that either didn't have time to do the book, and they're probably going to be in the second one. They've already committed to that, or I think one individual just doesn't want to be involved in the subject anymore, which I respect. So, but as a collective effort, it was definitely. It's not. I hate to say, my name's on the title, on the front cover of the book, but it's really a book about everyone else. It's everyone's book, because it's. I hope it's educational and has some historical aspect to it. The original idea of the book was it was my own personal quest, because I was reading, starting to read books. I was watching documentaries. I was listening to podcasts, and then I'd hear someone that is that I never knew who they were, but they've been involved in the subject for so long, and I'm naive and not knowing. I'm like, well, who's that? I can't believe. Oh, Rick Knoll. I never heard of Rick Knoll before, and then you realize how historical and how much impact these people have in the history of the subject. So that's when I just got this crazy idea. I said, well, wouldn't it be great to have a directory or a historical documentation of the individuals that, and really is for me, so I can put this in one book. So if you want to get started in understanding the subject, or if you're a seasoned enthusiast or researcher, because I've got some folks that are in the book that said, "Oh wow, I never heard of this person," and they were in the book. And so it's kind of refreshing to hear some seasoned, researchers not know who some of these other people are. And it's almost, and I don't want to use the word who's who, because there's hundreds of researchers and influencers. They're not all researchers.
Sure.
But I wanted for some of it was for my own personal, quest. I said, hey, I don't know who's doing what. So how can I figure out? And I said, if I've got this issue, I bet there's other people that would love to say, oh, wow, how do I learn about who's involved in this subject? And that's kind of how the book spun, how it started. And it just really was my idea to say, I need help. So if I need help, maybe other people need help as well.
Yeah. I think that when you look at, now that you're familiar with the amount of work that you put into writing this book, when you think about the next one, or the sequel, so to speak, of where you want to go with that, I'm sure you've got it already in your mind, a lot of the things you want to write about, people you want to talk about. But knowing the amount of work that went into writing this, how long do you wait before you delve into that process? Do you have kind of in your mind what that would look like, as far as, obviously for what you wrote compared to what I wrote, from the moment you start on the book to the moment you've got a manuscript and submit it, and then now you're still a few months away from anything being released. So you're talking about a long duration just to get it wrote. But how long do you think you're going to wait before you write the next one?
Not long. I've already, so when I wrote the first one, I had a list of names, and originally I said, how am I going to get 30 people? Because that's basically about what I talked to, and this is the great thing about the publishers. I sat and chatted with Alex, and we thought about page count, and he gave me suggestions on what, how long, how big of a book do you want? How many pages? Once we came up with that, we figured out how long the chapters were going to be. And then I could figure out how many people I could get in the book, roughly.
Sure.
So I made the list, and at first I'm thinking, okay, am I going to be able to get 30 people? And which is so naive. So I made a list, of probably 90 or so people. And then I started saying, okay, who can I get a hold of? Who do I know? So some of the individuals that aren't in the book, just because I didn't have access to them. So I already had a list of people. So I already have, I'd say 3 or 4 months ago, I already kind of came up with my book 2 list, a volume 2 list. And that's not final. I've done a little bit of preliminary work. I've already reached out to some folks to have them help me with the book and put some unique things. I'm going to keep the format the same for the most part. It's going to be the same style, but I got to add some new things because there's just some things I can't repeat in the second book because it's already in the first book. Some of the statistics.
Sure.
And am I going to list, just some of the lists I have in the back of the book. So, but I've already started working on it. Just not enough where I can say I haven't done any interviews yet, but I've already got commitments for the second book, and it should be exciting. So
you've got a similar format. It's just a different framework that you kind of have to build around it, as far as how you bring people into it. I'm curious as to I think you brought up an interesting thing, is that it is really it's kind of a historical reference for people. If you're starting your journey in this community of trying to learn as much as you can, that isn't easy. I even to this day, I have friends who are so well versed historically from where we've been over decades of listening to other people talk about their opinions, their research, what their feelings were. That when I have conversations with Brent Dill or Nikki from Harry Man Hoaxes and Hoodwinks, or Leon Thompson or Steve Coles, these people are so historically familiar with so many different people and what their impact was, positive or negative, on this community, that a lot of times I find myself in those conversations with them, and somebody will say, well, that reminds me of when so and so did this, and I'm thinking, I don't even know who you're talking about right now.
Oh, I know.
So I'm still there learning the history of where we have been, the ground that's been traveled.
I typically hear a name every week that I didn't know who they were. I'll
Yeah.
hear one of, someone on a podcast mention a name, like a Steve Coles or a Cliff Barrickman or someone, and I say, oh, who's that? So I still hear names out there that I had no idea that they were involved in the subject.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I appreciate you taking the time to come on tonight, and I hope that you let Dana know that having her on was awesome too, even though she couldn't stick around. I respect that. You guys have been busy today, doing some interviews earlier before this show, but so where are people going to go to buy the book? They can go to Hanger One Publishing, obviously. HANGAR .com, but where else can they find it? Is it in Amazon? Is it in all these different places?
Yeah, so the book can be found anywhere, and one of the things I did when I released the book, I purposely didn't put it out on the mass media platforms because there's individuals in the book that have their own museums, small business owners, and then some others that aren't in the book, and I wanted them to have first crack at making a couple bucks. So
sure,
they had autographed copies. So you can get the book at the North American Bigfoot Center, Cliff Barrickman's museum, on his web store, SasquatchTheLegend.com. Ken Hamilton's got autographed copies of the book. Lauren Coleman's got copies. Lauren's in the book as well. He's got copies of the book at the International Cryptozoology Museum. There's a gentleman, Vincent, who's on, he's got a website on Etsy. It's called the Bigfoot's Treehouse. He's got autographed copies. There's a few copies down at the museum in the Expedition Bigfoot Museum, because I was down there a couple weeks ago and dropped a couple copies off, some autographed copies. And Hanger One Publishing, obviously you can get copies there. And then anywhere else you want to buy, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Amazon, you can find it. Read it. You can. The cool thing about the book is you can read one. You can flip through and read about the people you want to read about. You don't have to go through the whole book at once. You can kind of go back and forth because it's different folks on every chapter. So. Sure. And then you can follow us on, obviously the Untold Radio Network. You guys are here, so you already know about that. So Jeff and I and the team, we all love you and support. Thank you for your support. But yeah, if you Google search the Bigfoot Influencers, which is another cool thing about the name, which was unexpected. There's nothing else out there like it. As the title was unique. So you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and which I hate doing social media, but I have to do it, and Instagram and all that stuff. So, and this was an honor. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff, for doing that. We really enjoyed being here.
Well, I've been looking forward to having you on and not just talking about the book. I mean, like I say, it'd be easy just to do a canned interview and tell me about your book, Tim. I think it's just fascinating. One, what drove you to want to write it? I find your chemistry that you bring to to the podcast with Dana is something that everybody appreciates. I think that kind of your perspective and your vision of what you would do in the next book and how we get there is just something that I wanted to hear about. Not just, I could have sat here and said, tell us about who all's in the book. Obviously.
Right.
And even the publishing process, we touched on that a little bit. I think that's interesting to some people. A lot of people think, well, so-and-so wrote a book. They don't really know what goes into it. It may seem like a process that's easier than they think it is or harder than they think it is. And think it's fun that people get an opportunity to hear about what that's like. So
Yeah, so many of the audience, I'm sure, have their own stories and experiences. Get it on paper. Get in touch with Alex and Doug, and they'll respond to you. And I'm sure we'll want to read it because there's some fascinating things that's going on out there.
Well, I know there are people out there that could write a book pretty easily. I mean, from what over the past couple of years, getting to know some of the people that are simply in our chats, I go through this chat list right now and look at the people who are watching, and every other name I see in there, I know they've got a story that they could write a book about if they wanted to. It's just that process, I think, kind of seems overwhelming to people. And I don't think it is. Many of these people's encounters and their stories and their experiences, I've been lucky enough, blessed enough that they've shared them with me in one way or the other. And I not only found it fascinating, I think a lot of people would. So
definitely. And I want to stop. I just happened to look at the chat, and John Ayers, I agree. Jeff and I 100% agree. There's not going to be any question about that. I would say the same thing.
So. Yeah, we'd probably have 200 viewers right now had Dana not left. So I don't want to make her feel bad or put that kind of pressure on her, but that's probably just the brutal and honest truth.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. We're not too bashful or we don't have any egos. We know.
We don't have the charisma that she does. So, I mean, let's just leave it at that. So we've got another show coming to the network, and it's a show that's called Beastly Theories. And I'm going to play a promo for it here and let people, I got to pull it up here first.
Excited about this one. Andy's a great guy.
Yeah, Andy's from the UK. And he is going to be bringing the Beastly Theories to the Untold Radio Network. Let me play this. Oh, now we.
It's that northern Minnesota internet.
So yeah, that's what we've got coming up. Hopefully that played all right. I played it this morning, and Doug is texting me saying, "This video's junk. It's buffering and all that." And it's just the Wi-Fi here right now was just absolutely horrible weather-wise. But hopefully people were able to see.
We'll make it through. Andy's fascinating.
Like you said, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I had Andy on. I interviewed Andy a couple months ago, and he interviewed me on his podcast, and I said, "Well, Andy, why have you? And can I interview you?" And unfortunately, I was sick. I was actually had COVID. I even getting that whatever a lot of other folks had, and it was rough. Dana and I both had it, so I mustered through it. But Andy's going to be fascinating. He's a cool dude, so it's going to be a lot of fun having him on the team.
I think so too. Yeah, it's a great lineup, and I look forward to seeing where the network goes and how it grows. And growing anything is a slow process when you're talking about YouTube or social media. But I really believe we've got interesting guests and interesting enough shows that there's something here for everybody. So if you can't find a corner of the room that you're comfortable with, then I don't know what else to say about this. There is truly something here on Untold Radio for everybody. So, well, I will let you go, Tim. Like I say,
Thank you,
I'm
sir.
just so thankful you joined us. So,
Likewise, a lot of
tell
fun,
Dana,
Jeff. Yep.
tell Dana we appreciate her and thanked her. So,
I will. You're doing great stuff, Jeff. Don't stop doing it. So thank you so much for having me on the show.
thank you so much for the compliment. Well, so yeah, I'm looking forward to the new show. Again, thank you so much, Tim and Dana, for popping on. Really looking forward to next week. Also, having Ron and Todd on together, I think is going to be just this whole, man, pour a bourbon on ice and kick back and enjoy the fire while you listen to these two share some of their experiences together. It's going to be an incredible night. It's going to be fun. The two of them spent an awful lot of time out in some very remote areas up in Washington. And a lot of their outings, they were with Peter Byrne. It wasn't just the two of them. Peter was with them. But it's just going to be fun listening to them talk about the experiences that they had, and I'm looking forward to that. Otherwise, I'm trying to think what else we got going on here. Let's see. Other than some more snow and more bad weather coming, we're going to batten down the hatches and get ready for that so that we're ready next Monday when that rolls around. Otherwise, the rest of you guys, everybody, take care, stay safe, know that you're appreciated. Love having you come in here and choose the show on as your way to spend some time on a Monday night. And we will see you later.